This story is titled They Stole My Inheritance, but I Made Them Regret It. Hey everyone, before we dive into today's video, I need a quick favor. We've noticed the channel's been losing some momentum, and one of the best ways you can help is by subscribing. It's fast, free, and makes a huge difference in helping us keep creating awesome content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. And now, let's get into the video. The last thing my grandmother ever said to me was, "Sometimes the biggest betrayals come wrapped in the prettiest packages, dear." I didn't understand what she meant at the time. But now I do. My name is Natalie, and last week, I watched my entire family steal my inheritance right from under my nose. The house that had been promised to me since I was 12 years old, gone. Sold without my permission, without my signature. I stood in my grandmother's Victorian house, the one she had poured her entire life into, clutching the envelope she had left me. The lawyer had just finished reading the will, and before I could even process the words, my mother's perfectly manicured hand was already reaching for the house keys. "Honey, you have to understand," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "The house needs so many repairs. We're just trying to protect you from that burden." Burden? I looked at her, then at my father, who refused to meet my eyes. Selling it without telling me was protection? My brother, Sullivan, leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, wearing the same cocky smirk he always had when he thought he was getting away with something. "Come on, Nat," he scoffed. "You couldn't afford the property taxes anyway." I barely heard him. I was still taking in the emptiness of the house, the silence that was too fresh, too unnatural. Just 3 weeks ago, my gran and I had sat in her sunroom, drinking tea while she told me stories of her childhood. Now they were divvying up her life like vultures. "You can't do this," I said, my voice shaking. "Gran left it to me. It's in the will." My sister Riley sighed dramatically, like she was so tired of my nonsense. "Actually," she said, flipping her perfectly straightened hair, "Mom and Dad have power of attorney. The sale's already gone through." "What?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "What sale?" My voice was barely above a whisper. Mom smoothed out her designer blouse, acting as if she wasn't ripping my world apart. "We found a lovely buyer," she said. "He's offered well above market value. The papers are signed." My fingers tightened around Gran's envelope. I hadn't opened it yet. It had arrived by courier that morning, with strict instructions to wait until after the will reading. That should have been my first clue. "Get out." The words came out before I could even think. Dad finally looked at me then, his face stern, like I was the one being difficult. "Don't be dramatic, Natalie," he said, his tone casual. "We're family." "Family?" I laughed, the sound sharp and hollow, even to my own ears. "Family doesn't do this." They stood there, completely unfazed, like they had already moved on. "We're meeting the buyer tomorrow to hand over the keys," Mom said, as if this was just a normal transaction and not outright betrayal. "You should come. Make peace with it." I didn't respond. I just stood there, watching them walk out, my so-called family, the people who were supposed to protect me, and I felt something shift inside me. The moment they were gone, I collapsed onto Gran's favorite armchair and ripped open the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, a single sheet of paper and a small key. "My dearest Natalie," the letter began. "If you're reading this, they've done exactly what I feared they would. But don't worry. I've left you something they don't know about. Something that will help you fight back. Check behind the loose brick in the garden wall, the one with the heart carved into it." I stared at the letter, my hands gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white. Gran always said the best revenge was served with patience and wisdom. Looks like she left me the recipe, and I was about to serve it cold. I didn't wait. The moment I finished reading Gran's letter, I was already outside, my heart pounding as I scanned the garden wall. My hands shook as I ran my fingers over the bricks, searching. Then I found it, the small heart carved into the surface, just like Gran said. I pressed against the edges, wiggling it loose, and after some struggle, the brick came free. Behind it was a sealed envelope and a small metal box. My breath caught as I reached in, my fingers closing around them. My pulse was hammering in my ears. Gran had hidden this for a reason. I had no idea what I was about to find, but I knew one thing. It was important enough for her to keep secret. I tore open the envelope first. Legal paperwork. I flipped through the pages, my hands trembling. It was my grandmother's real will, the one my family never wanted me to see. My stomach flipped as I skimmed the contents. There was a specific clause, added 6 months ago, right before Gran got sick. The house could not be sold without my explicit, written consent. regardless of any power of attorney. I froze. They forged my signature. They had to. I never signed anything. The realization hit me like a truck. They didn't just go behind my back. They had broken the law. I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to focus. If Gran had changed her will, she knew something was coming. She knew they would try to steal the house. That's why she left this for me to fight back. But why? I turned to the small metal box, fumbling with the key she had included in the envelope. My hands were slick with sweat as I unlocked it and flipped the lid open. Inside were more papers, old letters, receipts, and what looked like financial records. But one thing immediately caught my eye. A name. Edward Jackson. The buyer. Gran had marked his name in red ink. I scanned through the papers, my stomach twisting into knots. She had been tracking something. Notes, addresses, bank transfers. It looked like Gran had been gathering evidence. I felt sick. My family didn't just want the house. They wanted something inside it. Something Gran knew about. Something they were desperate to get their hands on. My grip tightened around the documents. Gran always said, the best revenge is served with patience and wisdom. Looks like she had left me the recipe, and I was about to serve it cold. I barely slept. The next morning, I was sitting in Skylar Martinez's law office, my hands gripping a folder filled with Gran's hidden documents. The office smelled like leather and coffee, but my brain was spinning too fast to focus on anything but the sound of Skylar flipping through the papers. She adjusted her glasses, her brows furrowing. Your grandmother was certainly thorough, she muttered, flipping to another page. I leaned forward, my nails digging into my palm. Can they really sell the house without my consent? Skylar smirked. That's the interesting part. They legally can't. Relief flooded me for half a second. Then it turned into something sharper. Then how? Skylar slid a document across the desk. Because someone forged your signature. I stared at the paper, the blood draining from my face. Look at the date, she continued, her voice calm but pointed. I scanned the document, my stomach twisting. They signed the sale agreement while I was in Seattle. I reached into my bag with shaky hands, pulling out my flight receipts. I placed them next to the contract, the proof glaring up at me. I was out of state, I whispered. Skylar nodded. Then we have proof. We can overturn the sale. And whoever forged this could face serious legal consequences. My hands curled into fists. Before I could process it, my phone buzzed. Mom's furious. She says you're betraying the family by going to a lawyer. A text from Riley. I turned the screen toward Skylar. She raised an eyebrow, smirking. Interesting how they defined betrayal. Before I could even form a response, a knock at the door interrupted us. Skylar looked up. Come in. The door opened, and my stomach dropped. Edward Jackson, the buyer. And the second I saw his face, I knew something wasn't right. Edward Jackson looked worried, not like a man who just bought a house, but like someone who realized he'd stepped into something way bigger than he expected. Skylar gestured to the chair across from us. Mr. Jackson, please join us. He sat down, adjusting his watch, his knee bouncing slightly. I assume this is about the house, he said, glancing at me before quickly looking away. I crossed my arms. You tell me. My mother assured you everything was in order, right? His eyes flickered to Skylar, then back to me. She did. Skylar slid the documents across the desk. Then explain this, she said smoothly. Because the sale requires my explicit consent. His face paled. That's impossible. Your family told me you agreed. That you just couldn't be there for the signing. They told you wrong. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Damn it. I knew something felt off. But they were so persistent. They said you were being difficult. That you were too emotionally attached to let go. I clenched my jaw. And what else did they say? Edward hesitated, then reached into his briefcase. I think you should see these. He pulled out printed emails. Pages and pages of communication between him and my family. I skimmed the first few lines, and my stomach twisted. They had been planning this for months. While Gran was still alive. Edward pointed to one email. Your mother mentioned there might be resistance. She said you were too attached to see the financial opportunity. I looked at the email's date. It was sent 2 days after Gran's funeral. My vision blurred with anger. Skylar stacked the papers into a legal folder. This is excellent evidence of premeditation. Edward shifted uncomfortably. There's more. I met his gaze. What do you mean? Your mother mentioned items in the house. My heart stopped. Hidden valuables, he clarified. She wouldn't tell me what. Just that your grandmother had things tucked away, and that they needed to secure the house quickly, before you had a chance to. He trailed off. I leaned forward. Before I had a chance to what? Edward swallowed hard. To find whatever it is she left for you. I felt the key in my pocket. The one Gran had left me. She had known. She had always known. Skylar picked up her phone. We need to move. Now. Skylar and I didn't waste time. As soon as we left her office, I was already forming a plan. I gripped my phone, rereading Riley's message. They're meeting tonight. Riverside Hotel. Room 412. I don't think you understand how serious this is, Nat. They're planning something big. My stomach tightened. This wasn't just about greed anymore. They were desperate. The audit was happening Monday, which meant they had less than 72 hours to cover their tracks. My family wasn't just trying to steal the house. They were trying to erase whatever my grandmother had discovered before it could be exposed. They had planned every move, forged every document, manipulated every legal loophole they could find. But they weren't expecting me to fight back. Skylar booked room 414, right next to theirs. Thin walls, close enough to hear everything. Riley was already there when we arrived, pacing nervously. Are you sure about this? She whispered. I didn't hesitate. Let's finish this. We pressed against the wall, and Mom's voice came through clearly. The audit team arrives Monday, she said. If we don't have that money transferred by then, we know, Kennedy, Dad snapped. But Natalie's lawyer is causing problems. Mom let out an irritated sigh. Then fix it, Griffin. We didn't spend 30 years building this business to watch it crumble because your mother decided to play favorites from beyond the grave. Skylar nudged me, whispering, record this. I hit the button on my phone, the red light blinking, capturing every word. Then Edward's voice cut through the conversation. What about the paintings? My breath caught. Paintings? You promised there were valuable artworks hidden in the house, Edward pressed. There are, Mom said flatly. Martha, that conniving woman, she had a collection. The insurance documents value them at over $2 million. My chest tightened. Gran's art. She had always said they were just sentimental pieces, nothing valuable. That was a lie. Edward sounded more impatient now. And you're sure they're in the house? In the walls, Dad confirmed. Behind the wooden panels in the sunroom. I nearly dropped my phone. Skylar scribbled on her notepad, insurance fraud. Riley grabbed my arm. What do we do now? She whispered. I was about to answer when a loud crack rang through the room. Riley, Mom's voice. My heart stopped. She had walked in on them. Riley's voice wavered, but she stood her ground. I heard everything, she said. The fraud, the stolen paintings, the fake accounts. I know everything. Mom's tone dropped, deadly. Honey, this doesn't concern you. Riley let out a bitter laugh. Doesn't concern me? You're stealing from Gran's estate. From Natalie. Dad sighed like he was so exhausted by all of this, like he wasn't the one orchestrating a massive cover-up. We are protecting our family's legacy, he said. Riley's voice rose. By committing fraud? By forging legal documents and hiding stolen artwork. Mom's voice turned sharp. You don't understand, Riley. This is bigger than you. But Riley didn't back down. The business was failing because you were embezzling money, she shot back. Gran figured it out, didn't she? That's why she changed her will. That's why she made sure you couldn't sell the house without Natalie's permission. Silence. Then Dad spoke, his voice tight. How long have you known? Long enough, Riley said. I found the real accounts. The ones you hid from the auditors. Gran didn't leave clues just for Natalie. She left them for all of us, to see who would do the right thing. Skylar glanced at me and nodded. We had them. This was everything we needed. I pulled out my phone and texted her. Mobile phone with arrow, call the police. Now. Riley straightened her shoulders. I'm calling the police. Mom's voice was pure steel. Like hell you are. A crash. A scream. That was it. I didn't think. I moved. I kicked open the connecting door. The door slammed against the wall as I stepped in, my heart pounding. Riley was pinned against the dresser, Mom's hand wrapped around her wrist, prying her phone away. Riley's face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. Let go of her, I said, my voice low, controlled. The room froze. Dad stood near the window, his face drained of color, like he was realizing for the first time that they had lost control. Edward was standing stiffly near the desk, his hands clenched into fists, looking like a man who had just realized he made a deal with the devil. Mom, though, she didn't even flinch. She slowly released Riley's wrist and smoothed down her expensive blouse, as if nothing had happened. Well, she said smoothly, turning toward me. The prodigal daughter finally arrives. I barely heard her. I was already recording. Skylar stepped in behind me, her phone up, capturing every second. "Let's make something clear," Skylar said, her voice cold, professional. "You are all currently on record, so I suggest you think very carefully before you say another word." Mom didn't even blink. "You recorded all of that?" "Every word," I said. Mom's smile was sharp. "So dramatic. You always did love a performance." Riley rubbed her wrist, stepping closer to me. "This isn't a performance. This is fraud. Forgery. Stolen assets. You don't get to twist it into something else." Dad finally spoke, his voice desperate. "You don't understand, Natalie. The business was failing. We had no choice." I laughed, the sound bitter. "No choice? You mean you had no choice but to steal from your own mother? You had no choice but to forge my signature? You had no choice but to launder stolen artwork through your company?" Edward shifted uneasily. "I think it's time I make a full statement about my involvement." Mom whipped around. "You wouldn't dare." Edward pulled out his own phone. "I've been recording too. Ever since you first approached me about rushing the sale. Something felt off, and now I know why." Mom's composure cracked. "You're all making a terrible mistake." Riley stepped forward. "The paintings, Nat," she said urgently. "They're not just valuable. They're stolen." I froze. "What?" "That's what Gran discovered. What Dad's been hiding for years. He's been laundering stolen artwork through the business. Gran found out when she realized one of her paintings was a forgery." My chest tightened. "That's why she changed her will." Dad sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "Martha confronted me 6 months ago," he admitted. "She had proof." The sirens were loud, getting closer. Skylar pulled out her phone. "Yes, detective. Room 412. We have multiple confessions recorded." Mom lunged for her. I stepped in the way. "It's over, Mom." The police stormed in, their voices sharp as they ordered everyone to step back. Mom's face remained blank, but her hands trembled at her sides. Dad didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the floor, like he had already accepted his fate. Riley let out a shaky breath beside me, her grip on my arm tightening. Detective Morris, a tall woman with piercing eyes, took in the scene. "We received a report of fraud, forgery, and financial misconduct. Who's in charge here?" Skylar stepped forward, calm, professional, and completely in control. "My client, Natalie, has provided recorded evidence of signature forgery, financial fraud, and involvement in a stolen art laundering scheme. We also have an independent witness confirming prior knowledge of the criminal activities." She gestured to Edward, who shifted nervously but nodded. "I'll make a full statement," he said. The detective turned to my parents. "Kennedy and Griffin, you're under arrest for fraud, financial conspiracy, and forgery." For the first time all night, Mom lost control. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice sharp. "Do you know who we are? Do you have any idea how many powerful people we know?" Morris didn't even blink. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. I'd recommend you use it." 2 officers stepped forward, pulling handcuffs from their belts. Dad looked like he was about to pass out, but Mom? She fought. "This isn't over," she hissed at me as they pulled her arms behind her back. "You think you've won?" I held her gaze. "I don't think, Mom. I know." As they dragged my parents out, Riley let out a shaky laugh, a half relief, half disbelief. The weight that had been pressing down on my chest for months finally lifted. It was over. Or so I thought. After the police left, I sat on the hotel bed, my hands shaking as I processed everything. My parents, gone. Their empire, shattered. But something still nagged at me. "The paintings," I murmured. "They're still in the house." Skylar's eyes sharpened. "Then we need to get there before the police sees everything." Edward ran a hand through his hair. "I can help," he offered. "I still have the keys from the sale." Or, well, what was supposed to be the sale. Less than an hour later, we stood in Gran's sunroom. The house was eerily silent, as if it had been holding its breath, waiting for this moment. Riley stood beside me as I ran my fingers along the wooden paneling. Then I found it. A loose seam. I wedged my fingers beneath it and pulled. The wood came free, revealing a hidden compartment. And inside, a stack of canvases wrapped in protective cloth. We carefully pulled them out, and as the last one was unwrapped, I felt my stomach drop. The paintings weren't just valuable. They were masterpieces. Riley's voice was barely a whisper. "Nat, do you know what these are worth?" Skylar exhaled. "I do. These aren't just millions. Some of these could be priceless." I swallowed hard. Gran had known. She had protected them, hiding them from the very people who would have sold them off to cover their crimes. My hands tightened into fists. We need to turn them over to the authorities. Skylar nodded. But first, let's get them authenticated. We'll do this the right way. For once, my family wouldn't be the ones profiting off a crime. A week later, the headlines exploded. Multi-million-dollar art smuggling ring exposed. The paintings had been stolen over decades, linked to international heists. My parents? Facing serious federal charges. Even their high-powered lawyers wouldn't be able to save them this time. I stood in Skylar's office, staring at the official court documents. My parents' assets were frozen, the company was being dissolved, and their partners were flipping on them fast. They weren't just going to prison. They were going away for a long time. Sullivan called me once. I didn't answer. Riley, though, she stood by me. The day the news broke, we sat in Grand's sunroom, drinking tea in her favorite chairs. She would have been proud of you, Riley said softly. I smiled, running my fingers over the armrest. She always knew. Gran had left me everything. Not just the house. Not just the inheritance. But the truth. And now, the house would finally be what it was meant to be. A place of healing. A place where no more lies lived. Months passed. The house, mine, fully and legally, was slowly restored. The paintings, once authenticated, were returned to the rightful owners. The FBI even confirmed that Gran had been working with authorities before she died, trying to expose the ring, but running out of time. She had trusted me to finish what she started. One afternoon, as I was cleaning out her old study, I found a sealed letter. It was addressed to me. I sat on the window seat, the sunlight streaming in, and unfolded it carefully. My dearest Natalie, if you're reading this, then you've done what I couldn't. You've exposed the truth while protecting what truly matters. Our family's real legacy. Not money, not stolen art, but the courage to stand up for what is right. I always knew you would. Remember, revenge is satisfying, but redemption is sweeter. I love you, my girl. Always. Gran. I pressed the letter to my chest, my eyes burning. The revenge? It was done. The justice? Served. And me? For the first time in my life, I was finally free. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, former employees, even old business partners, all gathered to witness the fall of Kennedy and Griffin Wallace. My parents sat at the defendant's table, their once flawless confidence replaced with exhaustion. The charges? Financial fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and international art trafficking. They were looking at decades in federal prison. I sat in the front row, my hands folded in my lap, watching it unfold. Riley sat beside me, tense but unwavering. Skylar was on my other side, flipping through a stack of documents that sealed my parents' fate. The prosecutor stood up, adjusting his tie. Your Honor, the evidence presented today proves beyond doubt that the defendants engaged in a calculated scheme to falsify financial records, forge legal documents, and launder stolen artwork through their family business. The judge barely looked at my parents before delivering his verdict. Guilty. Mom didn't flinch. Dad. His face crumpled. Riley let out a breath she had been holding for months. I didn't move. Didn't smile. Didn't react. Because this wasn't about celebration. This was about closure. As they were let out in handcuffs, Mom turned to me one last time. You think you won, she murmured, her voice cold. You don't even know what you've done. I met her gaze, steady, unshaken. No, Mom, I said. I know exactly what I've done. She opened her mouth, but the guards pulled her away. And just like that, the empire they spent their lives building was gone. Weeks later, I sat in Grand's sunroom, staring out at the garden. The house was finally mine, fully, legally, and without corruption. The paintings had been authenticated and returned to their rightful owners. Some had been missing for decades, stolen from museums and private collectors worldwide. The authorities even found fake copies my father had been selling to high-profile clients. Gran had known all along. She had tried to stop them, but she couldn't. So she left the truth to me. A soft breeze filtered through the open windows. Riley entered, setting down 2 mugs of tea, the same way Gran always did. You did it, she said quietly. I nodded. We did. She hesitated, then pulled out a thick envelope. I thought you should have this. I opened it and felt my breath catch. It was Gran's final handwritten will. In it, she detailed everything. The fraud, the stolen art, the legal loopholes she had discovered too late. She had tried to warn me. And at the bottom, in her elegant script, was a single note written just for me. My dearest Natalie, I knew you'd find your way here. I knew you'd be the one to protect what matters. This house was never about money. It was never about inheritance. It was about keeping our family from destroying itself. You've done what I couldn't, and now you're free. Remember, revenge may feel sweet, but redemption is sweeter. Live well, my girl. That is the real victory. Love, Gran. I pressed the paper to my chest, swallowing hard. The revenge? It was complete. My parents had faced justice. The stolen paintings had been recovered, and the business they built on lies had crumbled. But redemption? That was something I'd have to build from here. Riley squeezed my hand. So what now? I looked around the house, the one place in the world that had always felt like home. Now, it was time to rebuild. Not just the walls, not just the legacy, but the family that still remained. Gran had given me everything. Now, I would do right by it. And this time, I would make sure no more lies lived here.